85% white, 15% Negro. A big textile center, Gastonia calls itself the Spindle City and the City of Growing Beauty. It has a good record of race relations.
We move 881 miles south to reporter Ed Scott.
This is the Cane River, on whose banks the city of Natchitoches, Louisiana, was built, Ed. It's the oldest town in the Louisiana Purchase, having had its roots in 1714. It's traditionally and culturally Southern in mood. It has a population today of 12,000 persons, almost half of whom are Negroes.
The Negroes of Natchitoches are distinguished by a controversial statue in the town square, erected in grateful recognition of the arduous and faithful services of the good darkies of Louisiana. Otherwise, the almost 6,000 citizens of Natchitoches observe the normal relationship of white to Negro. Like Gastonia, it has a good record in race relations. This is the Supreme Court of the United States. For 165 years, its sacred trust has been to rule on and interpret the law of the land as embodied in the Constitution. Equal justice under the law. On May 17, this court ruled unanimously that segregation in public schools was not legal. See It Now devotes its entire half hour to an effort to reflect the opinions and attitudes of certain persons who live in Gastonia, North Carolina, and in Natchitoches, Louisiana. There is no such thing as a typical Southern town. We selected Natchitoches and Gastonia because they reflect communities in two distinct parts of the South. We start with Dave Gillespie of the Gaston Citizen.
Our greatest need at the moment is level-headedness. Whites of the South should not panic. Negroes should not whet their impatience. It is impossible for the South to turn back the clock and undo the injustice that was done to the Negro when he was brought into slavery. We cannot wish him away. We cannot close our eyes to his presence. The matter of educating the Negro is only one facet of the question, but the manner in which we handle it, under the principles of the Constitution, will set the pace for the solution of other phases of the so-called Negro problem. In a day when many nations and races are looking to us for leadership, to peace, and to freedom, we need to reflect in our own country the traditional American virtues of justice and fair play. All parts of this country, not only the South, should do some real soul-searching in this respect.
Next, Cade Dixon, who runs the Gastonia Bank of Commerce.
Frankly, I'm troubled. I had hoped for a decision of the Supreme Court that would be something in the nature of a straddle. I was opposed to Earl Warren being put on the Supreme Court for several reasons. I thought that he did not have sufficient judicial experience, and I was satisfied that he would not be sympathetic with the Southern viewpoint. Now, while this decision was unanimous, yet the Chief Justice masterminded it and rendered the decision. North Carolina, in my opinion, has the very best of race relations of any Southern state, and I would hate to see that disturbed. The thought in my mind is that a proper solution, the correct and best solution, would be arrived at not by revolution, but by evolution.
Gastonia has a white high school and one for Negroes. This one is for whites.
We have been seeing in our newspapers an era comes to an end. Our court has said that the doctrine of equal but separate public school education has no place. What do you think about this decision, Jane?
Well, our parents are more against non-segregation than we are, but the young people are actually the ones that have to live with them, and we may as well adapt ourselves to it now.
Well, I don't feel exactly that way about it. I think people in Gastonia during the past years have gotten away from this purely segregation business, because right now on our city council we have a colored man on our city council here in Gastonia. And but I don't think that, I think maybe I'm like most people down here. We don't react to things being forced down our throats like this. It's entirely a different thing, see, other than working it out yourself.
Well, I feel as the majority of the Southerners do that this decision is like a cloud coming over our Southland. But I think in time our colored citizens and white citizens can work out this problem, and I think it will strengthen America in the end.
When I learned of the Supreme Court decision, I was disappointed because I'm a Southerner. I was taught to be respectful of the Negroes as they were in my home, and I had a maid to bring me up. But I was not taught to socialize with them. I think if we, since the Supreme Court has given this decision, they will gradually go into our homes, our circles, and our church. And if this has to be done since the Supreme Court has given this, we are going to have to do it slowly, because it is such a different way of living. It's going to affect everything that we do.
Well, Miss Underwood, being a native Georgian, I'm very much against non-segregation. I feel that the Negroes certainly deserve equal rights as far as education and schools are concerned, but I'm against the Negroes and the whites going to school together. I think that we as white people have developed an air of superiority over their race, and I think it would cause for a split in both races if they mixed and mingled, because some of them couldn't come up to meet our standards.
Well, my opinion on this issue would probably be different from the others here, because I have had experience in going to school with the colored in New Jersey, and I have lived up north, a lot of my life. And I think that if the people down here could see just how well the colored and white get along in the school in the north, and if they could adapt themselves down here like they are there, I don't think there would be any trouble, but it would take a while for the people down here to adapt themselves, because we aren't used to anything like that.
We still have many people in the South who have the opinion of separate but equal rights, separate but equal privileges. I think that probably that opinion is out of date. By that I mean that during the earlier history of our nation, we had aristocracy. We had a definite line of demarcation as far as the races were concerned. I think the Southerners have progressed to the extent now that we can approach this decision and this question as open-minded individuals, and I think we must do it that way, or else we will never solve the problem. That old opinion, that old school of thought is out of date.
This is Highland High School on North York Road.
History tells us that we have much to remember if we were to study American history. There are a number of events that the American people can never forget. To mention a few, the discovery of America, 1492. The Dred Scott decision, as handed down by the Supreme Court, and the proclamation of emancipation. And perhaps during your time, the development of the atomic bomb. On Monday, May the 17th, Chief Justice Warren read the decision of the Supreme Court justices, which ruled out segregation. I am pleased personally at the vote that was handed down, a 9-0 vote. It proved that the American people are thinking, that our statesmen are truly living up to expectations, that they are basing their opinion on our religious beliefs, basing their opinion on democratic living. Suppose now we hear what ideas you have on the Supreme Court decision.
I like the Supreme Court ruling on segregation because I think that we as Negroes can get a broader education and can advance farther than we have in the past. And one other important reason is as the communists cannot use this as propaganda against the democratic form of government.
The segregation laws were created at a time right after the Civil War when there was intense feeling against the Negro. when the whites had only thought of the Negroes as working in their house and so forth. And you must realize that it must have been sort of hard for them to get used to someone being accepted as their equal after working for them, and something as though a cat or a household animal or something that you expect to see, but there's no great love for. And these laws are old, and they were created by people who had nothing to do with this modern civilization of ours, and they are altogether outdated. I'm pleased with the issue that segregation has ended. But for myself, I would not like to attend the schools with the white children because of the fact that we aren't welcome. And I think that the consequence will be a mixture of Negroes and whites. But the consequence will also be an embarrassing situation for the Negro.
3 days after the Supreme Court decision, the Parent Teachers Association met at a white elementary school.
Gastonia, and I'd like to know what some of the rest of you think, and I'd like to hear some opinions from some of the rest of you.
I'm a classroom teacher here in the school. Personally, as a teacher, I wouldn't mind teaching both colored and white children because I don't think that there's really be any problem. I think where the real problem would be in the home, because that's where you learn your prejudice is at home, and you've got to educate these parents. Thank you.
This problem is not something new. We've seen it work itself out in the armed services here in the South. We've seen it work itself out in the postal services. We've seen it work itself out in the police forces of our communities or through the South. We go into the stores with colored people. We try on the clothes that they try on, and we buy them that they have already tried on, and they seem to fit us, and we seem to like it. I believe with all of my heart that this problem will be worked out. I hope that it will be worked out gradually. I hope that they can enter the first grade and work from there on up, and then it will work itself out so gradually that we will not be conscious of the fact that we've had a problem. And I believe the South will come forward with a progressive move, and that this section of the South will not be radical enough to do foolish like maybe some other sections of the South will do.
As for me,
The Negro, PTA.
it was something that I had looked forward to with anticipation, because had the Supreme Court ruled otherwise, it would have, to my mind, been somewhat of a letdown, or the United States would have lost face in the world because of the problem of segregation. As of now, we will have some views from Mrs. Hope.
Madam Chairman, in my opinion, we don't want to be in the home and sleeping and doing with the white people. We want to live free and feel free. We want schools like they have. We want streets like they have. We want homes like they have. We just want the same wages. We work like they do. We want wages like they do. We don't want to be in their homes and in their schools. We want schools of our own. We are people, just people. And we have children, and we want our children brought up just like the white people brought up, but we want them to be just them. We want them to be ourselves. We don't want like a heap of them think we want. We want freedom in every way and everywhere. We want to feel free. I just burns within me sometimes when I see the conditions of our children and our homes, and that causes so much crime. That's why the crimes come in. Back alleys and back streets, over the fence. When they clean up that and put us on the map like the white, we'll feel free, and that's as far as we want to go. We just want our equal rights. It's due us.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Hope.
Natchitoches, Louisiana is 73 miles from Shreveport, 58 miles to Alexandria. As with Gastonia, no Supreme Court action since the Dred Scott decision hit it with such impact. This is Cunningham of the Natchitoches Times.
We believe that the Supreme Court decision ignores the fact that, for good or ill, the white South pays almost all the taxes that go to the school system, and that he who controls the purse had better be considered in making plans. It is this factor that makes us decide that Monday's decision may well turn out to be a disaster for the Negro.
Natchitoches has one college, for whites only. There is a high school for each race.
The Negro has made tremendous advances in this state and in the South in the past 15 years, and that leads me to say that segregation for both races is best. Segregation has and is working in the South, which contains 2/3 of the Negro population. The population of the Negro people in the United States is 15 million. The population of the Negro people in the South is 10 million. In Minnesota, with 14,022 Negroes, or 1 out of every 200, it certainly wouldn't be the same situation as compared with Mississippi, with a population of 90 out of every 200. I'm now going to throw this discussion open to you and receive your questions and comments.
Even though the Supreme Court has passed a ruling that segregation should be abandoned, that's no sign it will be. I believe that the Negroes will still go to their school and we'll go to our school, unless they have some system of zoning, and that wouldn't work in Natchitoches because the whites and the colored live too close to one another. You just couldn't zone it off anyway. There'd be whites going to colored school and coloreds going to white school, just a few, and those few would be very unhappy.
I personally do not believe that the Negro of the South wants to go to school with the white people. Therefore, if the law is passed and segregation is done away with, and we do go to school with them, I believe that such things as race riots and other things will come about, because I do not believe the South is ready for segregation, non-segregation, excuse me.
And you have to consider the fact that there are an awful lot of colored teachers in the state, in our state of Louisiana, and if we did away with segregation right now and, say, had the two races intermingling in school next year, well, there would be an awful lot of colored teachers out of jobs because, well, it would just be that way. I mean, mostly if a colored teacher and a white teacher would both apply at the same place, well, most probably the white teacher would get the job.
A decision of the Supreme Court has been made that segregation has no place in public schools. We were asking you today to come prepared to discuss some of the problems that might face you as a result of this decision. What difference might this make in your lives as craftsmen, as workers? How do you feel that this Supreme Court decision will work out in education?
In my opinion, Ms. Martin, I think that the decision handed down by the Supreme Court is one of the most wonderfulest things that happened in America, and especially in the South, in the last 50 years, and it will affect me greatly. Speaking of myself only, not being financially able to go to a distant college and spending money, I figure if this law is put into action that I'll be able to attend one college right here in my hometown of Natchitoches, and that college is Northwestern State College, to obtain an education.
I think that if the white and the colored students mingle, I don't think there will be any conflicts between them, and because I've lived with white people before. I am a veteran, and I slept with them, I ate with them, and we got along fine. We were just friends, and I became friendly with some of them before I became friendly with my own race, and I think it's the wonderfulest thing that ever happened to America.
Ms. Martin, I would like to add to what's filed about in the classroom. I don't know exactly how I would feel in the classroom with the other white boys today, because we've been segregated all the time. But I would like to experience this, because all men are created equal. And I think that if we would go to school with the white boys and have equal facility over there with them, we would be better students. Because we don't know if I'm better than they are or they are better than I am. But I would like to experience, see what would happen if I would go with them.
On Saturday evening, there was a meeting of citizens at the courthouse. By custom, the whites and Negroes sat on different sides of the aisle.
Not very well have handed down any other decision. For had it done so, it would have said to the world that we are afraid to really risk democracy.
I went to at least 8 different schools in Pennsylvania and in Detroit, Michigan. And in all of my years in the elementary schools and in the high schools, I did not meet one Negro teacher during all of those years under a non-segregated system. Professor Williams.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Mecker, are there as many Negroes in the North as in the South?
In certain areas there are, and I believe in proportion to population you don't have as many colored teachers in the non-segregated areas of the North that you have in the South.
If I'm going to a state-approved school, coming out with a certificate approved by the state of Louisiana and recognized by the nation, and I'm only qualified to teach my children or colored children, I have no business in a classroom at all. If my education or my training doesn't enable me to fix as good a pipe as a plumber as there can be found anywhere, if my training as a shoemaker does not train me to fix as good a shoes as can be found any place, if my training to use the surgeon's knife, if you will, does not train me to cut on one human being who has the same anatomy as another, I dare say my training has been at fault. I have no business in a classroom at all.
I don't think the decision of the Supreme Court is right. I think it's taking away states' rights. And I believe our country was founded on the principle of a democracy for the people and by the people. And I believe that you people, our colored people, will agree that Louisiana has done all they could to give equal opportunities to all people, regardless of color, race, or creed. And we should give everybody equal opportunity. But I've been living around the colored people all my life, and I don't believe they want to go to our white schools. They want to have their own schools and their own things so they'll feel like they belong to them and not mixing with the whites.
On the seventh day, after the Supreme Court decision, the people of Natchitoches went to church.
As citizens of the United States, let us not be too hasty, but let us remember to think and plan with the spirit of Christ. Some of the good people of both races who live under the protection of the United States may not be satisfied with the decision of the Supreme Court, but all of us know that the Supreme Court of the United States is the highest governing power that we have in the world. Paul tells us, let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever resisteth the power resisteth the ordinance of God. Amen.
And in Gastonia, North Carolina, on the seventh day, the people went to church.
My own heritage is rooted in the South. My father, born in 1847 in South Carolina, owned slaves for a few years. He lived through the hard days of Reconstruction and under the carpetbagger, and yet he came to adjust himself to these new economic conditions and to change the race relations. And I suppose the last area of my own life to come under the influence and dominance of Jesus Christ was in my own attitude towards the Negro. And so now for several years I have held the conviction, and I still hold it, that the practice of segregation cannot be defended on the basis of the Christian religion. And now that the highest judicial body in this republic of ours, consisting of 9 men appointed by 3 different presidents of the United States, has given this unanimous decision, I feel it to be my conscientious duty to do my best to implement this action helpfully, patiently, lovingly, and realistically.
We have tried to hold a mirror behind 2 southern cities as they debate and discuss seriously and soberly a new aspect of an old problem.